To go back to the nuclear situation, what more can Japanese authorities do to regain control of the nation's reactors and protect the population? Earlier I spoke to John Large, an independent nuclear consultant based in London. I began by asking him to characterise the current situation.
Well, in a word, desperate. What we're seeing now in its later phase is desperate measures, desperate and unplanned measures, almost ad hoc, which don't seem to be proven. Quite frankly, the latest information coming from Japan, from this plant, is that they're using a riot cannon to squirt water into a reactor fuel pond. I mean, this is crazy.
What option do authorities have at this point to contain the spread of radiation?
Well, if the containment's gone, and certainly the containment's gone on the fuel pond on reactor 4, there's not much you can do about holding the containment together, because the problem is getting near to do any repairs. And these are high-level failures of the containment, so it's not possible to do that by, say, low-level remote control vehicles. So what you have to do is bide your time and wait your time.
So what can authorities do now?
Well, their first priority is to protect members of the public, clearly. There's some difficulty here. What they've done around this site, the Fukushima site, is they've evacuated, we believe, about 180,000 people from the immediate surroundings of the site. What they've done is extended a 3-kilometre evacuation zone out to 10 kilometres, then out to 20 kilometres, and beyond that. They've set up a zone where people should shelter. You know, to evacuate people and to manage an aftermath of a nuclear accident, you need trained emergency personnel. And that resource, that emergency resource, may well have been depleted, or certainly hard stretched because of the tsunami and the earthquake incidents that have become a national catastrophe. So this nuclear one is really stretching any personnel. But really what they have to do now is move on to the larger public. The real problem now is if the containment's open, and if there's been a significant radioactive release, and particularly if that radioactive release is continuing, then they have to look towards the wind direction, and particularly the atmospheric stability conditions, should that plume be forced down onto a major urban conurbation. And of course that major urban conurbation that's creating considerable concern is if the winds are in the southerly direction, that will be Tokyo. And that's a 30-40 million population. That would be a very significant health detriment if a radioactive plume actually descended on that city.
Well, what would happen?
Well, people will receive radioactive dose. People would then, over the following years and their lifetime, suffer carcinogenic problems, cancers, etc., associated with that dose exposure.
How challenging would it be for the authorities to balance the full disclosure of information with the need to not create panic?
Look, one of the difficulties is this. And you have to bear in mind that the Japanese people have a collective memory of nuclear events that occurred 60-odd years ago. The public perception of all things nuclear, particularly radiation exposure, is a fate worse than death. Governments and authorities in all countries tend to respond to that by providing a conservative, somewhat optimistic picture of what has actually gone on during the first 1 or 2 days. They need to do this. This is not conspiracy or lying. Maybe it's prudent management of the truth. They need not to startle the horses effectively. They need to assure the population so the population doesn't decide to take its own action, particularly in self-evacuation. If a population self-evacuates, then it can put itself unwittingly in harm's way by moving out of a non-radiation area in panic and unawareness into a radiation zone.
Is this situation limited to Japan, or does it have broader implications globally?
What we're seeing here with this series of disasters developing before our very eyes is, of course, it's about earthquakes and tsunamis and lack of organisation, etc. There are detailed nuts and bolts to this. But really what we're examining here, or what we're witnessing here, is a failure of the nuclear safety culture. What this accident has shown is that there's something wrong, something flawed about the nuclear safety culture as practiced in Japan. In other words, something's got through the safety net. That's what we've been discussing, the fundamentals. It's not safe. the safety culture didn't cater for this. So the safety culture in Japan is very similar to the safety culture in the United States, in Western Europe, and in Britain, and I dare say in Australia. It applies to Lucas sites. The same sort of probabilistic risk analysis and judgments are made using the same guidelines, the same limits, and the same conditions. So the problem is, if this system hasn't worked in Japan, it's also at risk in Britain, in Europe, in America, and elsewhere. So we need now, because of this demonstration, to look very carefully at the way in which we demonstrate nuclear safety to be acceptable.
John Large, thank you for your time.
Thank you.